Let's get this panel started. This is Queer Manga, History and Cultural Context. And before we get started on that subject, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. It makes me feel good being surrounded by so many talented, creative, enthusiastic people in the comic scene, both artists and fans. It's a time when we're experiencing a lot of backlash, marginalization, and erasure. So being here is a kind of magic spell against all of that bullshit. We're pushing it out the window. We are learning and growing and saying fuck you to anyone who doesn't like it. Queers in Comics is a site of resistance. We're here building the world we want to be in, celebrating the stories of LGBTQ plus individuals, and we can't take our freedom for granted. So I just want to express my appreciation to everyone here and everyone responsible for organizing this event. Justin Hall and Jennifer Camper, Matt Salati and Maya Lawrence, and everyone at CCA. So thank you. So I'm going to discuss the themes of this panel and introduce the panelists. Why is it important to understand the history of queer manga? Japanese manga has been a site frequently for transgressive exploration of gender and sexuality, perhaps more than a lot of other forms of sequential art. The rich variety of queer expressions found in Japanese manga today did not materialize out of thin air. It's rooted in a history of Japanese art going back centuries and exists within a context of Japanese society that's at once highly permissive and strangely prescriptive when it comes to gender norms and sexual behavior in the contemporary moment. In this panel, we'll dive into the historical legacy that has brought us to the present in a variety of queer and queer-adjacent manga, and examine the market forces, heteronormative social pressures, and artistic freedoms that inform contemporary manga. So, without further ado, let me introduce the panelists. Erica Friedman is a former publisher of lesbian-themed Japanese comics. She has written about Yuri for Japanese journal Eureka, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and she reviews Yuri manga, anime, and related media on her blog Okazu, which I highly recommend. She has lectured at MIT, University of Michigan, Harvard University, Kanagawa University, and others. Gengaro Tagame probably doesn't need much of an introduction because he is an iconic figure in the gay manga scene. He has been working for more than 20 years. It was one of the first, if not the first, commercially successful gay manga artist, and the co-founder of G-Men magazine, which ran from 1994 to 2016. And he's also an art historian who has collected much of contemporary history of Japanese gay art in a multi-volume series called Gay Erotic Art in Japan. And look out for the release of his new English language book, My Brother's Husband, coming very soon. I also want to apologize, we don't have Tagame books present for sale, but you can go directly to Anne Ishii of Massive, who I'll introduce nextly, and make a purchase through her. We have book plates available that Tagame can sign, and then once you get the book, you can put it in there, and it's almost like he signed the book right here. So Anne Ishii is a New York writer and the owner of Massive Goods, purveyor of Japanese queer and feminist comic arts and paraphernalia. She has translated over 20 books from Japanese and represents such artists as Gengaro Tagame, Rokude Nashiko, and Jiraiya. With Graham Colbeans and Chip Kidd, she has edited Massive Gay Erotic Manga and the Men Who Make It, a Fantagraphics anthology from 2014, as well as The Passion of Gengaro Tagame, and Rokude Nashiko's book, What is Obscenity, which I also recommend. Jonathan Hall is an assistant professor of media studies at Pomona College. Hall works with multiple media with special attention to queer East Asian resistance. In 2015 to 2016, Hall co-directed Touch of the Other with Takao Kawaguchi. Jonathan explores queer experimental filmmaking and gay male approaches to photography in Japan, and he has translated Japanese graphic narrative artists, including Gengaro Tagame. And finally, we have Layla Acker, who leads the publishing division at Viz Media, directing the editorial, production, design, and sales of hundreds of print and digital volumes. She shapes production, licensing, and publishing strategies in North America and overseas. Beginning as a bookstore manager, Layla transitioned to editorial positions at Alfred A. Knopf and Random House before moving to Viz Media in 2007. Thank you for letting me read those biographies. I know all of you, but it makes me more comfortable to read from the page. I'm going to let them all do their own presentations, but first I'm going to give a quick, very brief overview of sort of the trajectory of the history of gay manga, from Edo period representations of male-male sexuality to the present. And this is kind of stuff I've talked about in a couple of other places, so I'm going to just touch on it briefly and then show a brief excerpt from this documentary I'm working on, which is called Queer Japan, and it's an ensemble film. Erica's in it. And it tells the story of many different people from across the spectrum of gender and sexuality in Japan. The segment I'll show you has to do with boys love manga, and there's an interview with an artist named Kyun and a historian named Hori Akiko. So I'll just do this quick presentation, then we'll show that. So these images on the screen right now are from the artist Suzuki Harunobu, who was kind of a prolific ukiyo-e artist in the 18th century and was known for drawing stuff outside of the normal wheelhouse of woodblock prints. He would show sort of pedestrian images, people on the street, not necessarily just the higher echelons of society. These images come from an art show that's currently on display at Japan Society in New York City called A Third Gender, Beautiful Youths in Japanese Prints. And the theme of that whole show is about how gender in the Edo period is more complicated than the binary that we often think of when we look back using our framework of the present. Wakashu, which is a word for the youths, were basically male youths between adolescence and adulthood. And they, in this show's philosophy, constitute a third gender that was not male or female, but something else entirely. Because wakashu could be sexually desired by adult men, and there was this whole set of signs and signifiers built around the pursuit of boy love. And in these prints, we see what's happening here is a wakashu is being seduced by a female prostitute, perhaps reluctantly, because this older man, the ninja, is in the room next to him enjoying himself. But perhaps they came to this place together, and it's not really going down how he planned. I recommend, if you get a chance, to look at the program for this show. It's full of incredible prints, each with their own story. And the Edo period was rife with representations of male-male sexuality in various forms, in samurai culture, in the theater, amongst the Buddhist clergy. And this is both in woodblock prints and literature. And it's this rich history. There were over 600 books printed in the Edo period about the pursuit of boy love. And a lot of it has been pushed under the rug. After the Meiji Restoration in the mid-1800s in Japan, Western influence came in and changed a lot of things around in Japanese society. There was like a cultural colonization and certain things like the pursuit of wakashu was deemed, something from the savage past, something to be hidden. So this is a history that's just starting to be explored in academic settings and in art galleries and museums. But jumping forward a couple hundred years, here's some more prints from the Edo period. But let's talk about post-war gay art. So in the 1950s, right immediately following the war, there was a proliferation of the hentai zashi, which is perverse magazines or the perverse press. And in these magazines, one of which is Fuzoku Kitan, a smorgasbord of human sexuality was presented. It was kind of everything kinky, from BDSM to lesbian sex to gay sex. And there were images from Western art, like Tom of Finland and George Quaintonce's artwork showed up on the cover of this magazine and inside, as well as photography of gay male erotica and artwork by Japanese artists, many of whom are included in Gengaro Tagame's series, Gay Erotic Art in Japan, that I mentioned earlier. The first volume focuses on artists active in the post-war era, in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And then in the second volume, it goes on to talk about the next generation of gay artists who stake their claim in gay magazines, which sort of evolved in the 1970s, the most influential of which was Barazoku. But there were a number of really incredible, influential artists who operated anonymously and published their work directly through these magazines for gay men. But manga didn't really take hold until the 1980s. These are some covers of Barazoku. The first one is Ryu Fujita. The second is Sadao Hasegawa. And then Rune Naito, who's a very famous artist in Japan for different reasons. He's not necessarily known for his gay artwork, but is kind of the godfather of kawaii art. So it's kind of amazing that he spent so much of his career making gay art that's still kind of not recognized. But so Barazoku, sorry. Gengaro's embarrassed because I guess I'm putting him on blast a little bit. This is his first manga ever published. But it's historically of note because it was in this supplement to Barazoku magazine called Barakami, which came out in November 1986 and was the first magazine devoted entirely to gay manga. I'll move on. He's got funny stories about that one. It was, kind of a slapdash affair. They didn't tell him they were going to publish this piece. They just went ahead and ran it. But it kind of opened the door for the publication of more manga by gay artists. And by the mid-1990s, Tagame-san had published a couple of books that had done well in the commercial field, and then he co-founded G-Men magazine. These are some early covers that he drew the artwork for. And G-Men was incredibly influential as far as making a platform for gay manga artists. Many of the artists that are published today and that are included in the anthology that we worked on together called Massive, were kind of incubated by G-Men and by the efforts of Tagame and his colleagues. These are some covers by Jiraiya, whose artwork I'm also wearing right now. He took over the cover art responsibilities after Tagame had done 63 issues. And G-Men really did continue to have influence until it sadly demised last year. But now that magazines are on the decline, a lot of the artists who we see coming up now get their work out through the internet, get their work out through self-publishing, doujinshi. And so G-Men was kind of like the link into the present. And Anne's going to talk a little bit more about the economics of publishing and how manga gets put out. And lastly, this is just a slide of the store Big Jim, which has 2 branches in Tokyo. I took these photos in 2012. So the image on the right, you can see a mixture of magazines, collections of manga that were mostly serialized in magazines, and then self-published doujinshi. If you go back now, 5 years later, it's going to be, the selection of doujinshi is actually much broader than it was even 5 years ago, and the number of magazines has shrunk. So it's just interesting seeing gay manga in this space. So that's a brief introduction to a long history of gay manga. I encourage you to explore more through reading books like Massive and Gay Erotic Art in Japan. And now I'm just going to show you this quick video clip from Queer Japan and turn it over to my fellow panelists. So the first thing you're going to see is just a 2-minute trailer, and we're having a crowdfunding campaign for post-production right now. So if you like what you see, please go to gofundme.com/queerjapan. And then I'm going to show clips from 2 interviews, or 2 segments. The first is with Nakamura Ching, a lesbian manga artist who was supposed to be here but couldn't make it, unfortunately. So I just included like a little 1-minute interview clip with her. Yeah, she's amazing. I love her work. She's really engaging. Erica and Gengara were on a panel with her that I filmed in Tokyo last summer.
And we'll be talking about her work in the craft panel, the queer manga craft panel tomorrow. We'll be talking about that.
Yeah, please.
Amazing craft work.
Please check out that panel.
我慢すればある程度の楽しい生活ができる。ちょっとの我慢でいいんだったら。
ゲイに目覚めるよりも先に BDSM に目覚めてしまったという形になります。
言葉を尊重しようとして言葉で重ねていくと言葉に振り回されて結果何も見えないっていう。
ね、僕はよくアメリカのプレッシャーってハードシェルだよね。で日本ってソフトシェルなんだよねって抑圧のあり方。
やっぱりもっとね日本の社会の中で一言ちょっと多いちょっとうるさい人になる。
それはどういうふうに受け止められようとしょうがないっていうかあり得ると思うんですよ。100人いれば100人の受け取り方があってもね、結果的にはその方が面白いんですけど、その方が面白い。やっぱりなんかこんな格好でお店入ってても誰も振り向かないとか誰も文句も言ってこないとやっぱりちょっと寂しいっていうのはあるんですよね。そういうノイズでもありたいんですよね。
罰ゲーム。そう意外といい仕事するかもしれないわよ。まあそんなグダグダな始まり方ですけども。
別にレズビアンに限った漫画を描いてるわけじゃなくて、普段は SF とか怪獣とかが大好きで、 セクシャリティと関係ないものを書くことの方が多いんですけど、ただレズビアンを題材にすることやレズビアンを出すこともあって、それはただ単に自分がそうだからだし、それにレズビアンを出せば女の人いっぱい描けますよね。描くの楽しいですから、女の方がっていうのもありますね。でカミングアウトしてるのもやっぱりカミングアウトせずに彼女を作るのって大変じゃないですか。でも私は女の人が大好きな漫画家ですよって世界に対して言ってればどんどんみんな来るじゃないですか。楽しいですね。
BL はボーイズラブの略です。男の子同士の恋愛の漫画、ボーイズラブです。1970年代に少女漫画で少年同士の恋愛を描こうとする、少女漫画作家たちが、現れて、彼女たちがなぜ少年愛って言われるんですけど、少年同士の恋愛を描こうかと思ったかというと、男女の性愛が少女漫画では描けない。で描いても健康的な性愛しか描けない。10歳くらいの時に雑誌だけ出していいなんかジュニアっていうBL の同人誌の通販雑誌みたいなのがあって、それをなんかスーパーの本屋さんの本棚に置いてあって、それをなんか立ち読み、なんかジャンプのなんか少年漫画かなと思って立ち読みしたら、なんかそのワンピースのキャラとかもBL が載ってて、なんかこんな世界があるんだと思って、なんかそこからこういろいろパソコン持ってたんで、その当時からパソコンで調べたりして、なんかいつの間にかハマってました。女性が性的な表現を見るっていうことに対して、今でももちろん素敵
歩くよりはここの方が歩きやすいかなって一人でも。
Sorry about the sound. The music wasn't supposed to be that loud. But yeah, that's just a portion of this segment I'm working on about BL. There's also a really interesting artist named Zin, who Gengaro introduced me to a couple of years ago. And actually both Zin and Kyun, the young woman there, draw artwork that's consumed both by women and by gay men. I met Kyun at this Dojinshi festival that includes both BL artists and gay manga artists. So it's interesting to see the overlap there. But yeah, that's just a portion of this documentary I'm working on. Go to the GoFundMe if you like what you saw. And I'm going to pass it over to Erica now. Or I'm sorry, I got the order wrong. Let's start with Layla. She's going to talk about BL, and I'm going to load her slideshow now.
Okay, while the slideshow is loading, this is just going to be a Cliff Notes, very capsule version of what's been the BL industry to date in Japan and the West. And yaoi, as it's usually called here, and BL or boys love in the United States, it's not gay comics, it's not queer comics in and of itself, and there's a lot of problematics that are attached to that. But I'm going to kind of leave those aside for a second. We can talk about those later if people want to. However, it is a genre that fundamentally started as one of women drawing comics for women that features male-on-male romance. There's no attempt at realism in the queer relationships in most cases, but I still think it's interesting to talk about for a couple of reasons, which is one, it's kind of adjacent territory. These works are wrestling with issues of sex, of gender, of social identity, and also because it's achieved this kind of like mass scale of global popularity. So clearly there's something going on there that is speaking to vast numbers of people, both straight and gay, and kind of in the full spectrum in between. So generally, BL, is the conventional wisdom is that it started out with a group of manga artists in the 1970s, and specifically two women, Keiko Takemiya and Motio Hago, who you can't really see her name through this, but Mimoto Hagio. And they were part of a group of manga artists called the Year 24 group, or the Nijunen Gumi. And the reason being that they were all born in 1949, which was year 24 in Japanese reckoning. These two ladies lived together in an apartment house, which kind of became a salon for manga writers, and the birth of the BL genre is kind of conventionally traced back to this group. Two of the major works that were one of the first mass distributed, and by mass I mean in bookstores, published by quote-unquote reputable publishers. The first works that depicted male-on-male romance were these two series. The middle one is Kaze to Ki no Uta, which is the Song of Wind and Trees, and then The Heart of Thomas no Shinjiro by Moto Hagio. And there's the other work that is another one of Takemiya's works, which is Tutera, or Terra A, which is a sci-fi thing more. But these works were found a pretty significant amount of popularity when they were released, and I think even took their publishers by surprise. And one of the things that they did was kind of set the template for how the genre handles male-on-male romance. And by that I mean that in a very gross oversimplification, the way that this is handled is that the stories are, in order to kind of get out of like the very toxically heteronormative space and to create these stories in a relatively free context, the mechanisms by which they did so was either to place the characters in almost really to make them more androgynous. So in Tutera, the characters are male and female, but they exhibit characteristics very strongly of both. So in a way, kind of gender is taken into the background. The other two works, Heart of Thomas and then Song of Wind and Trees, instead of relying on androgyny ambiguity to get around that, what they did is that they set their stories in contexts in which the other gender was simply not present. So you allied that gender separation by making women not there, so men effectively become the only gender. Now clearly that's really complicated because it's all stand-ins for the existing gender spectrum and so on and so forth, but it's a big topic. So, but what you'll see in the industry going forward from this time is that the stories, and again, in a very gross general sense, tend to fall into one of these two buckets. So this launched in these two works launched during the 1970s and 80s, did really well, and then, next slide, we get into the 1990s. So back then, in the 70s and 80s, when those works launched, there was no such thing as the BL genre. Those series were published into magazines that were for male or female audiences. But over the years, more and more creators started drawing in that genre, so commerce always follows art. So, and some companies realized, hey, there's something going on here, let's take advantage of it. And so starting in the 1990s, you started seeing the birth of the actual BL publishing industry. Magazines were launched that specifically catered to the genre, published only in this genre, and it was supported by the doujinshi, or parody culture, where young creators started cutting their teeth on creating original works based on mass properties. So, to take like a mass manga property, like, I don't know, Death Note or Naruto or something like that, or popular television shows, they would create self-published comics featuring male-on-male romances using characters from these larger properties, and then would sell them at the really big comic conventions like Comic-Con, which happens a couple of times a year, and a whole network of smaller local shows. So at any case, by the 1990s and 2000s, the genre had achieved a mass where the commercial structure started springing around it to support it. These three artists were some of the top-selling artists at the time. Yun Koga with Earthian, Kazuma Kuraka with Kizuna, and then Sanami Mate with Fake, and a couple of other things. And again, these fall into the two sides of Earthian features mainly, androgynous context, and then these two featured settings that really were only populated by men, the world of Yakuza and kind of police detective world. And then going from the 2010s to the present, the BL industry in the meantime in Japan had achieved a scale of, it was a market value of hundreds of millions of yen per year. It had become its own kind of commercial juggernaut. You started seeing ancillary products being produced, consumer goods, animation, even live action. It started pushing into a lot of different areas. Concurrently, it started coming over to the West. And through the evolution of what was happening in technology, through the internet and whatnot, people started having more access to this type of content and proliferating it that way. At the same time, in the United States and Europe, manga started coming to the West in a big fashion, and you started seeing the establishment of manga companies being set up to publish that stuff. So by the 2010s, the big manga companies had set up BL imprints. The first was Central Park Media in about 2004 with the Be Beautiful imprint, followed by Tokyo Pop setting up their imprint, digital manga publishing. A host of independent publishers started working in this field as well. So these were, again, three of the more popular artists from this period. Falls into the same kind of like, single gender and or androgynous stuff. But the interesting thing was is that by about the 2010s, those structures started falling apart in terms of the content itself. So you start seeing an evolution in terms of what the content was presented as. And I use these as an example because Finder was actually started, it's a female artist, but it was actually drawn for a men's BDSM magazine, the initial chapters. And it turned out to be so popular that Libre, which is the main BL publisher in Japan, picked her up and turned her into essentially a star. Her work has been licensed all over the world and she's her own kind of commercial force at this point. Tetsudo Okadaya, the man of tango, she's a woman drawing bara, which is actual gay comics. And Yoka Nida with Embracing Love is considered kind of like the most traditional BL, but it's set in the gay porn industry. So the kind of barriers between all this content started breaking down around this period in a good way. Then the next slide, kind of bringing us to the present day, which is that because of the economic and political forces that have been at work over the last several years, as Graham noted in his entry point, there's started to be pushback in a lot of different respects. The interesting thing is that this kind of pushback from governments and economic forces is happening at the same time as a profusion of the content creation itself, largely thanks to the digital sphere. But what I mean by that is around, I guess starting probably around 2010 or so, governments started passing ordinances against explicit content in many different forms. It reached its apogee in 2014 in Tokyo, the birthplace of all this stuff, where Governor Ishihara got through a measure essentially forbidding, they positioned it as against child pornography, but effectively what it meant was the censorship of pornography, period. Of course, the way that it is enforced is highly political. Straight male porn, or porn produced for straight men is almost never really prosecuted. It tends to be either BL or gay manga. It's unfortunate, but that happened. Concurrently, similar ordinances were passed all over Southeast Asia. Bookstores were prosecuted. To my knowledge, individual artists haven't really been prosecuted yet. But there is that force that's happening here. Here in the United States, something similar, the company that I work for, Viz Media, we launched our BL imprint about 5 years ago, and we are continually getting challenges from Amazon and from other venues in publishing this content. However, all of those attempts to kind of minimize this doesn't change the fact that these works are more popular than ever. It's impossible to stop them at this point, I think, because a lot of the creative energy has moved from the established publishers to self-publishing and online. As an example of that, some of the most recent, and the other thing that was happening is, again, that movement from just being an Asian-specific kind of genre to basically now it's become a truly global genre, and a lot of the content creation is coming ex-Japan right now. So one example from the West is the comic Starfighter, written by a artist in the United States named Hamlet Machine, an artist in mainland China who goes by Old Jian. And China, by the way, has extremely strict laws on the books against this content, but that doesn't stop the fact that she created 19 Days, and it's one of the most popular comics globally. I don't know how she preserves her autonomy or independence, but she's doing it, so good for her. And it's starting, the genre has moved out of the ghetto, so to speak, to the extent that one of the most popular anime series of 2016 in the entire field was this thing called Yuri on Ice, which is also, interestingly enough, written and directed by women, which is very rare for animation. And it's about ice skating with gay protagonists, but it's not simply a BL story. I mean, it's somewhat realistic, and it has achieved a huge fandom support from the actual pro figure skaters themselves, who are now convinced they have a mole in their ranks because apparently there's a lot of inside information in that. So go figure. So it's an interesting time to kind of be working in the field right now because of these opposing forces of the proliferation of creative accomplishments being offset by pressures from the government and other resources. And the other thing that I forgot to mention when we talk about the economic pushback is a lot of the publishers have gone out of business. because of some of these strictures. So I think that we'll see what happens in the coming years. Next slide. So also present in the United States and in the West, Yuri Comics, and Erica, I'm sure will speak to this in much greater depth, which is comics depicting female-on-female romance, has been a bit slower in uptake in the West, but it is steadily gaining ground. Yuri Comics, as they exist right now outside of Japan, are kind of interesting because they're a little bit more multivalent, and by which I mean, in terms of the sales itself, probably the greatest number are examples of this title in the middle, Citrus by Sabarota, where it's the kind of Western equivalent of kind of lesbian porn, where it's lesbian content, created by male creators for a male audience. But as with, BL, the structures are breaking down. So even though Citrus, ostensibly was for that, it's also been embraced by lesbian readers because it's not exploitational per se, and the way
it
that
is.
It is. Okay.
Oh, it's a horrible story.
Well, you can talk about that.
I'm sorry. It's just absolutely dreadful.
Yeah. So in any case, some lesbian readers and
some other than me.
Some other than Erica. Conversely, After Hours, which hasn't been published in the United States yet, but we'll bring that out next year, was written by a male creator, not for a male audience, for kind of a general audience. And then Sweet Blue Flowers, which is written by a female creator for a female audience. So I like the fact that we're starting to see a lot more cross-pollination in these areas. And kind of one of the things that was in Graham's segment is ultimately you want to get to the point where these relationships are depicted because they're part of the story, not necessarily because they are the story. And After Hours, for example, is interesting because it features a lesbian relationship, but that happens to almost be incidental. It's a story about these two girls falling in love and kind of the club scene and whatnot, but it's not like, oh my God, lesbians, it's, and so hopefully, we kind of see the industry evolving in that regard. I mean, where you're really talking about personal growth stories or whatever kind of stories you want to do, and they just happen to feature same-sex relationships. In terms of, and I think this is kind of out of the purview of this discussion, but one of the big issues in these whole industries is the way that different countries, different nationalities, and different cultures deal with this content in different ways. How it's received in Japan is very different from how it's received in Germany, which is very different than how it's received in the United States, and that's all down to the implicit cultural, biases that we all carry with us. Speaking as a BL publisher in the States, I can say that about 3/4 of our readership is female. About half of them identify as non-binary. I don't have exact numbers because it's not like we're like interrogating our readers, like, what are you? But it's a good, from a creative standpoint, again, I think it's a very exciting time to be around. I really like the fact that the younger creators and readers right now have a base in which to build on. I was talking with a younger colleague of mine, and by younger I mean like 20 years younger than me, and he grew up in an age where you could have this content and it wasn't really remarkable. And I was trying to explain to him, back in my day, the thought of having gay comics was just unthinkable. It just didn't exist. I mean, it did if you went to certain places in the East Village, maybe if you went, down to Christopher Street in New York, but it as an unremarkable thing that was carried in Barnes and Noble, it just didn't happen. So as much as there's kind of been countervailing forces over the last year, last years, it's always a good corrective to remember, hey, there has been a lot of progress that's been made, and hopefully we can keep building on that. So that's the capsule history of BL and Sword of Yuri.
Thank you, Layla.
Okay, so I'm taking a slightly different tack than Layla. I do a panel at a lot of anime manga cons called The Secret History of Yaoi and Yuri, and it's all about the historical aspects, like Graham was talking about, that BL comes out of a lot of the tropes developed in the Edo period. Yuri actually was originally, a lot of the tropes were developed back in the Heian period, so it's actually earlier. In the early 20th century, There were a lot of women writing girls' literature for the first time in Japan, and Yoshino Buko was the woman who I consider sort of the grandmother of Yuri. And a lot of the tropes that she established are still the things that are most well known in Yuri manga and anime. But today we're going to take a different tack, and we're going to look at sort of the recent history. And as I say, it's lesbian Yuri manga, how lesbian activism and organizational skills and propensity for finding jobs near copy machines led to the creation of an entirely new genre. If there are any lesbians in the audience, you understand what I mean, right? We always have jobs where we're doing newsletters and whatever the hell. So go ahead and go to the next one. So back in this, we're talking back, rather than going back to the early 20th century, which is when I think the tropes of Yuri manga started, we're going to actually start with lesbian identity in the 1970s. So these are actually much later. These are from the 1990s. These are some of the historical collection that I got through varying means, but it's Hasegawa Mami's collection. And these are doujinshi and newsletters from lesbian groups. And I don't have pictures of the inside content. When you open them up, you have essays about lesbian life in the late 80s and early 90s. You have Party Up had a list of all the parties that were going to be happening for the next few weeks and what clubs they were, because if you're familiar with lesbian clubs, a lot of times they can't sustain business for very long. So what happens is you have a lesbian party organizer who uses gay clubs in Japan. And also you get comics. So Lemon, what happened was Lemon started off as a community newsletter for whatever group of lesbians it represented, and it says right on it, woman only communications, and it had essays, and then it started having some comics, and I have some later issues of Lemon that was then more comics, less essays, less news, more meetings, and it became a little bit more political and a little bit more comics. So what we have here is in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, as lesbian identity in Japan is sort of developing around fairly typical circles of groups of people getting together to do events, to do talking, and creative endeavors. They're selling these little magazines in the Shinjuku Nichome and also at comic events where they're kind of sharing with their little groups, trying to expand it out. So these are some early lesbian communications. So go ahead and hit the next one. And then what happens in the if you look here on the left, you're looking at the late 70s, the late 60s, early 70s. We have Gecko magazine and Luna. It was a magazine that had letters by women for women, which is actually something that was established back in the 1930s in girls' magazines. So you had magazines that were written mostly, edited by men, and they would have women send in content, and particularly girls, and there was these really passionate letters that girls would write about each other. There was platonic, passionate love, and they would write about how they had seen their senpai, and the sun was shining in her hair, and on and on and on and on, and they had the very purple prose. And a lot of these women went on to become the published artists. And Yoshino Buko, who, as I say, I consider the foremother of Yuri, she started that as well. She would write in these beautiful little short stories, and they became a generation-defining work called Hana Monogatari in the 1920s. And 70, 80 years later, when I started publishing Yuri manga, I called our collections Yuri Monogatari after her work. So in Gecko, you had that sort of resurrection of those girls' magazines for adult lesbians, where they're writing in, I saw it, you remember The Advocate? You get the back page of The Advocate, back when it was a real newspaper and not some crappy online thing that it is now. But I mean, if you were a New York person too, you get the Village Voice was actually the best, right? Every Friday, the Village Voice. All the New Yorkers, we know this one. The Village Voice back page was the most awesome, right? And you'd get these letters with like, I saw you on the 7 train, at 8 o'clock at night. You remember those? So that's what Gecko here was. And in the late 80s and early 90s, lesbians are getting together and taking those communications, those newsletters, and making magazines, and this isn't all that surprising. And I love this particular copy of Frina here in the middle, because while it's a mid-90s comic, the artist on the cover went on to become incredibly famous. Her name is Sakurazawa Erika, and she became a very, very well-known josei artist, and never again was in a lesbian magazine ever. Right. So that happened a lot, by the way. I have a whole lot of magazines from the late 90s where very famous artists did their lesbian work, and then they never did that again. They moved on and became well-known writers and artists. And on the right here, you have Anis magazine. Anis was, after Frina, which only came out, it had one issue. Anis magazine was, for a few years, the lesbian magazine in Japan. And it had, wait, you're never gonna be surprised, it's the parties, the maps to the clubs, communications, essays, interviews. It was exactly the same thing that you'd seen 20 years ago in the communications and the little newsletters. And here it was in a color-covered magazine. I'm sorry to say, Rika Takashima, who is the woman who's the cover art on Anis, she was supposed to be here at this event, and she was not able to make it, so I'm repping for her. This is her characters, Rika and Miho. And she started telling a story about a young lesbian, and the first chapter of the story is Rika coming out. She's going to her Shinjuku Nichome club debut, and did she have the right underwear on? You know, it's all this, nothing changes, right? It's all the same. It's my first lesbian club. And then she did this story for about 10 years in Japan, and then came to America, and I published it originally in English, and eventually we collected all of it. So 20 years after it had started, it finally ended in its final publication form. Go ahead. So I want to talk a little bit about back to the comic markets. A lot of modern artists got their start doing doujinshi, and I think all of us are going to end up probably talking about doujinshi a lot because, like gay comics here in America, doujinshi are what people are doing when they're getting together with a circle of friends and doing an anthology of gay comics that they're printing because one of them has a job at a printing shop or one of them has a color copier at their job, you know. And so self-published manga and manga magazines were and are, as Layla said, very much this sort of the incubator for talent of the lesbian community. So on the left here we have a page from Cutie Beret, which is one of Rika's doujinshi, and she did it for a circle back in the 80s that she was friendly with. They said, hey, we're making a newsletter. Is it starting to get really tedious, right? We're making a newsletter and we want a comic. So she did a parody of Cutie Honey, which is a very well-known comic by Go Nagai, who is my spirit animal. He is, if Tezuka Osamu is the god of manga, Go Nagai is the perverted uncle of manga, and everything he's ever done is my favorite thing ever. So Cutie Beret is the two little octopoid creatures down at the bottom are actually going to turn into beautiful girls and bring art to the earth. So it's Tatakaya, Cutie Beret, and this was Rika's little comic that she was doing as a parody for this newsletter. That would eventually also get published some 20 years later. She did it as a doujinshi in a color as an adult. On the right we have a piece of a page from a little newsletter that was from a circle called Girlish. And Girlish was going to the comic markets and selling a nice color, cover, hard, you know, sort of perfect bound press magazine. And inside was how lesbians meet each other, or what does it mean to be a lesbian, or what is AIDS, and like all this sort of informational things. And this is from, and the woman who drew it is a woman named Morishima Akiko, who went on to become a very famous yuri manga artist. So what happens is you've got these doujinshi, these incubating spaces, and these people go on to become well-known, respected, professional artists in these spaces. You can go ahead and hit the next one. So on the left here is a 1993 manga. It is a Sailor Moon parody manga that I own. focused on Sailor Mercury, Mizunami, by a woman named Morinaga Milk. And if you look on the right, the top right is the Japanese version of her breakout hit 15 years later in the publishing market. She'd been doing doujinshi for years and years, and she'd had a couple pieces, but Girlfriends was her breakout hit with a 5-volume fantastic manga that was published by Seven Seas in a 2-volume manga series in English, just 2014. So this is a Yuri manga artist who started in that same incubating space of doujinshi, of parody doujinshi, and has moved on to become a well-respected. So we now have Rika, we have Akiko Marishima, we had Sakura Erika, we have Yamaji Ebony, all these names that ultimately go on to become exceptionally well-known from these community newsletters and these community circle-based communications. Go ahead, one more I think I've got. So in 2014, something really, really, really amazing happened. I've been talking about and writing about and obsessing about Yuri for 15 years as of August. Or so a little bit longer. My blog is 15 years old as of August. In 2014, I was approached by the editor of Eureka magazine. He was doing an issue about Yuri as a genre. Now, I've been pushing for this pretty much for about 15 years, seeing it as a specific genre of its own. BL began 15 years earlier than Yuri. So I was 15 years behind, so Leila's talking about how it's got a slower uptake because it was 15 years younger. It didn't really hit here until the 2010s. And, you know, I can only push so hard, right? So all by myself. So, you know, I only exhort every single person to buy as much as they can. But, you know, and she was absolutely right talking about the market. In Japan in 2014, Yuri became a genre. And in this magazine, I was very pleased to have an essay about the history of the word and about the genre and about its multivalent things. And one of the things that Leila mentioned that I'd like to expound upon is the reason Yuri is multivalent is because where BL came out of straight female artists drawing books for themselves, so in effect a kind of gay male porn for women, right? Yuri has a whole bunch of things. Yuri as a sort of fetish shows up in men's work for men. It shows up, so you've got lesbian sex, you've got predatory lesbians, you've got pure romantic love by the kinds of guys who fetishize that, which always worries me a little bit. I write about this a lot on my blog. If you read my blog, Okazu, you will read this endlessly where I go, that really kind of worries me. Straight men and women, you worry me a little bit. And so you've got that, but you've also got lesbians writing stories for themselves, like the doujinshi I showed you, and lesbians reading those doujinshi and writing about it in Eureka, saying, oh my God, the first time I ever read this thing, I saw a completely different story than everybody else was reading. Which brings me back to me for a moment. In 1997, my wife was unemployed, and she was watching television, and she said to me, oh, I'm watching this cartoon, I think you'd really like it. It's called Sailor Moon. And I said, okay, so one day I came home from work early, and we're watching an episode, and I'll never forget the episode. It was called Cruise Blues in English. And she says, I turned to her about halfway through, and I said, we're watching two different cartoons. I said, you're watching a prepubescent little girl's cartoon, and I'm watching one with incredible lesbian subtext. And that's what happened in Yuri. You had lesbians reading it. Reading things like Sailor Moon going, whoa, really? And then you had lesbians drawing for themselves their own stories, like Cutie Beret as a parody. And then they start breaking out and doing their own professional work. But you also have at the same time men writing Yuri for themselves, so it's a lot more fetishy and a lot more sex and bigger boobs and shit. And then you've got, sort of the girls' literature Yuri, where you've got this sort of perfect love in these, you know, schoolgirl spaces that have no men in them and there's no adults, and it's all perfect and pure, but will end the day they graduate high school because all lesbians die. So, and then, because this isn't complicated enough, you've got the publishers in 2000s of Yuri magazines, which finally started in 2003, saying, well, we want to capture all those audiences, but make sure you make the men happy. So, and I'm not joking, in 2007, one of the major magazines, actually, the editor wrote an editorial going, why are we forgetting about the men? And my answer to that was, sorry. But, so that's why it's multivalent, because basically everybody has their own yuri, right? So in 2014, we became an official genre. We can move on. So that's what, and speaking of the online space, I wanted to end with this. Digital everything, right? This has changed everything. So this morning I was sitting in the Underground Comics panel, and somebody asked a question, where's all the energy? And I thought, do you not have a computer? What do you mean, where's the energy that used to exist in gay comics? It's on Pixiv. Why, how do you not know it's on Pixiv? So this person named Kabi Nagata wrote, here on the left there's an image from Pixiv, and she wrote a story, and it was incredible. It was personal and painful, and it's called My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness. And it's really not. It's really about her experience with depression and with an eating disorder. And ultimately, once she made her way through those two things, she was able to find, she already knew she was gay, but she didn't have room for anybody else in her life. You know, she was filled with herself. And so she tried to sort of find companionship, and it didn't work. And ultimately, when she makes it through, she's pretty much out and comfortable and human. And this book has been licensed for English. It's coming out this summer. It's coming out in June. By Seven Seas again, who is our major Yuri publishers. I told them years ago that I was going to create the audience, but they had to make the money, so they're licensing everything. So everything's digital now, and I can't overstate the importance of DeviantArt and Pixiv and Twitter for communications between artists in ways that we've never ever seen it. So if you want to know where queer manga is, I mean, if you're an artist and you're all about the drawing of, well, that's cool. But look online, because that's where everything is happening right now. And if you aren't on Pixiv yet, I recommend it highly for knowing what's going on. Also Twitter, because they all talk to each other, because that's where everything's going. So digital everything. I think that's the last one. Right?
Yeah.
So okay.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand it over to Ganguro next. We only have 20 minutes left, unfortunately.
I was going to say, but we can just skip one.
Okay, well, maybe we'll have time at the end. I think we could go over a few minutes because there's a break, but let's try and get to everyone.
Okay, I'm going to introduce the master Kazuo Kamimura's comics, Kanto Plane. It was serialized on Young Comic. It is common seinen comics from 1976 to 78. I'm sorry, I'm going to speak to Japanese, to please translate it, and I will translate it. なぜ私がこの上村和夫の関東平野というのを、紹介したいかというと、日本のそのメジャーの漫画の中で描かれたクイアなモチーフというポイントにまず興味があるということと、今までその日本のクイアな漫画というとどうしてもゲイ漫画、ボーイズラブ漫画、ユリ漫画といったようなコンテクストで語られがちなんですけれども、そういったコンテクストとは全く無縁の、もっと一般的な漫画の中にもクイアなモチーフというのはあって、で実は私はそれがとても重要なことなんじゃないかと考えているということです。
The reason I'm interested in Kamimura's work here is actually specifically because it doesn't exist inside the queer context whatsoever. It's completely unrelated to the categories we've described so far, queer, gay, yuri, bara, whatever. And I think that's actually as important to talk about in terms of what qualifies as queer manga as what we describe as queer manga.
でこの上村和夫さんの「関東平野」という漫画は、さっきも言いましたけれども、一般の青年誌に1970年代の半ばに連載されました。で内容は、一応この上村先生の半分自伝的なもの、全てがノンフィクションではないんですけれども、ちょっとその自伝的な要素を織り込んだ、戦後第二次大戦後から70年代ぐらいにかけての少年の成長物語になっています。
And as I mentioned, it was a general audience story. It was published in a general audience YA magazine. It's actually half biographical. It's not entirely biographical, but it does talk about his experience growing up in the post-war period in Japan, from post-war till around the 70s when it came out.
で、この物語の中の重要なキャラクターの一人に銀子というトランスジェンダー女性のキャラクターが出てきます。でこの銀子というのは、主人公は、お父さん、親を亡くしておじいさんに育て、東京の空襲で親を亡くして、おじいさん、田舎におじいさんのところで引き取られているという。でそこに同様に都会から母と娘が疎開をしてやってくるんですね。でその母の娘というのが銀子というトランスジェンダーのキャラクターです。
So, Ginkgo is a character whose parents were killed in the Tokyo airstrikes and is raised by a grandparent who, and she came up.
No, that is that was a hero.
Hiro, sorry. Hiro's parents were killed in the Tokyo airstrike, and they were is raised by a grandfather, and then Ginkgo comes up to Tokyo and is a transgender female woman. Yeah.
でこれがその銀子ちゃんなんですけれども、これは、この一番右のパネルは、これは彼女が初めて主人公に自分は男の子だということを見せる場面です。で、彼女はこうやって自分は実は男の子なんだと見せるんだけれども、主人公は決してそれは驚くんですけれども、それだからといって気持ち悪がったり差別をしたりというのはなくて、2人で仲良くその秘密を共有するんですね。
So here you see, obviously, this is Ginkgo showing this main character, Hiro, who's a cis boy. I have boy parts, I'm a boy, but I'm a girl. And, you see here, it's clear, Hiro is shocked, but not disgusted, and actually accepts it. It's a secret decided to share together.
で、この銀子ちゃんは、やがて学校に育って中学校になるんですけれども、ある時期までは銀子が男の子であるということは誰も主人公しか知らないんです。
Ginkgo goes into middle school, and at this point, actually, there are very few people, or nobody knows, I'm sorry, that she's transgender. Actually, Hiro's the only one.
でところがある日学校で、ちょっと多数決、民主主義は多数決だという話になって、主人公がその多数決によってちょっと汚名をかぶるというか不利なことになるという事件があるんですね。
多数決、
数が多い方が正しい、少ない方が間違ってる。でそれに対して彼女はその数が大きい、その意見の数が多いのが正しいこと意見の数が多いことイコール正しいことではないだろうと言っていうのを証明するためにクラスメートに私は男の子だと思うか女の子だと思うかという投票させるんですね。で投票させたことによってクラスメートはみんな銀子は女の子だと思ってるから銀子は女の子だと笑って投票すると、銀子は正規を見せて「はい私は実は男の子なので多数決で私を女の子だと考えてたあなたたちはそれは正しくはないんです。あなたたちのその手続きは正しくはない。つまりその数の多さをもってこれでそれが正しいとすることに対して彼女はここで体を張って抗議するんです。
So they're in class talking about communism and the concept of the people's power, and Ginkgo wants to make the point that the majority doesn't necessarily always have the correct answer, is not always right. So, then she gets into this argument with the teacher about whether truth is defined by the number of people who believe in it, and she insists that that can't possibly be the case, and uses her body to prove a point by asking the entire class, do you think I'm a boy or a girl? And because nobody knows, everybody says, obviously you're a girl, and then she shows her parts and says, I'm actually not.
で彼女がそのトランスジェンダーだということを分かったらクラスメートたちがクラスを授業をボイコットするんですね。あんな男女と一緒に授業を受けるのは嫌だと。でさらにそれを知った、それがバレたことを知っ た彼女の養いの義理のお父さん、銀行の義理のお父さんはその彼女の髪を切ってこう虎狩りにするという罰を与えるんです。
So her classmates boycott class in disgust. They don't want to share a classroom with a disgusting person like that. And word gets back to her, adoptive or foster dad, who punishes her by making her cut her hair.
ただそういった目にそういった差別的な状況は受けるんですけれども、この銀行自身は、それに対して決してめげたりはしないんですね。自分が男の子女の子トランスジェンダーの女の子だということで学校が大騒ぎになった時に、もう彼女は平然とその大の大人がその一人くらい女の格好をした男がいたからって何大騒ぎしてんだバカバカしいみたいな感じで言い放つ。
This discrimination doesn't deter Ginkgo from her conviction about her identity, however, and she continues to live her life and uses this, she's like, there have been adults who've been masquerading as men and women, so I have every right to be doing this as well.
でその彼女は結局髪を切られた後元の女性の見かけに戻る髪が伸びるまでという形で納屋に閉じこもってストライキをするんですね。そしてその髪が伸びてた頃にまた女の洋服は自分であつらえて、外に出てくるんですけど、その時はもうちょっと主人公がのおじいさんが亡くなってしまって、主人公が東京の親戚のとこおじいさんの友達のところに引き取られるので、それもう別れになってしまうというので少年時代は終わります。
So she goes on strike, hides herself in a room until her hair grows back, refuses to come out until she has the hair she wants, makes clothes for herself in the meantime because they aren't providing dresses. And then this foster parent, the grandfather, actually passes away, which kind of marks the end of her childhood. She's sent to relations of the family so now she has a different foster family.
でそれからまた時間は10年くらい15年ぐらいなのかな飛んで、主人公はもう東京で成長して、青年で若いイラストレーターとして働いています。でそこにある日成長した銀行が訪ねてきます。
So 10 to 15 years past, they're adults. Hiro is now an illustrator in Tokyo, and one day Ginkgo runs into him.
で銀行は田舎で育って子供じゃなくなって大人になって自分の生き方を自分で選べるようになるまで田舎で頑張って耐えてきたと。でようやく大人になって自由を得たので東京に出かけたい、東京に行こうと。なぜならその頃東京には女装した人たちがお客をもてなすバーというのがいっぱいできているらしいから、そこに行って私の仲間に会って一緒に働きたいという思いで上京してくるわけです。
Ginkgo says that she kind of hibernated or incubated in the countryside until she could properly become a woman, and then moves to Tokyo because she says she'd heard that there are bars that cater to people who will actually pay for the company of transvestites.
でこれはもう割と今でも共通だと思うんですけども、やはりちょっと田舎の封鎖的な社会だと、セクシャルマイノリティはどうしても生きづらくて、自由に生きるために都会に出てくるというパターンはこれは今でもこの時代も多分変わらないことだと思いますね。
And this depiction of the countryside being a difficult place for transgender folks to thrive is no doubt the same today here in Japan. And so this depiction continues to be relevant.
でこの銀子というキャラクターは自分が他のその他大勢とは違うということは分かっている。で違うからその他大勢と同じような幸せ、つまり、成長して結婚して子供を産んでというような女性の幸せは自分は得られないということは最初から諦めています。そういう意味では銀子が自分はこういう存在だからといったところから生まれる悲しみというのは何度も描かれます。
And she decides early on by being reinforced that she is different from everybody, that she won't ever aspire to have the things that so-called normal people had, like marriage and kids. And there are many scenes in the story that depict her sadness about that sort of realization.
でその銀子というのは小さい頃から唯一の一番の味方だった主人公のことを密かに好きでもありまして、で大人になって一緒に東京でデートのように歩きながらこんなに綺麗な夜を君と二人で歩けるなんて夢にも思わなかったという夢みたいだという感じで泣いたりもします。
これヒロだって？
そうそうそう。
So yeah. So there are even scenes where she's actually out on a walk with Hiro and they're having this beautiful, tender, romantic moment and she starts crying. You know, I never thought I would be able to enjoy such a beautiful evening like this with a beautiful person like you.
でそういう具合に彼女の心の中の諦めというか悲しさみたいなのは描かれるんですけれども、しかし彼女は自分を憎んだりは決してしないキャラなんですね。決してこの自分が悪いとかそういうことはなくて、自分は自分というところはものすごく最初から最後まで強く持っているキャラで、その自分を通すためにこういう悲しみがあるから仕方がないという受け止め方をしています。
So in this way, there are a lot of scenes that depict this sort of inner sadness, the reconciliation, and the resignation to the things that are going on, the things that she can't have. But in no way does this become her feeling sorry for herself or blaming herself or denying herself. She's always she has a lot of conviction, obviously, about who she is, and she knows who she is.
そしてそんな彼女というキャラクターを実は周囲の人間というのはかなり最初の頃から最後までサポートする人々がみんな多いんですね。で例えば銀子は小さい頃にお父さんとお母さんに「私は女の子になりたい」と言った。そしたらお父さんとお母さんは大笑いして好きなようにさせてくれたというエピソードがあります。
But it also turns out that around her, she's had people who've understood that situation, and she's always just been really direct about this. And there's a scene where she's depicted as a child telling her parents she wants to become a girl when she grows up, and they laugh and say, "Well, you know, knock yourself out."
でさっきもから言ってるように主人公自体は銀子のことを特に拒絶はしないで仲良く親友になっている。そして主人公を引き取った東京のおじさんとおばさんという大人の2人の女性も同様に銀子に対しては極めてニュートラルにそういう人なのねじゃあという感じでそれ以上でも以下でもなくちゃんとニュートラルに接している。だから割とこの銀子というキャラというのは世界周りからちゃんとサポートを受けてるんですね、物語の中で。
So in a sense, because she and Ginko and Hiro get along, and he, as I said, has been accepting and doesn't chastise her, and his foster parents and uncle and aunt also sort of accept her in a neutral sense, just sort of, you know, take it for what it is. Her interactions with people around her has been depicted generally positive.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have 5 minutes left, so if we could just wrap up. I would like to get to Jonathan's piece.
So, じゃあ、要するに何が重要かというと、BL とかよりとかいったそういうジャンルフィクションの文脈ではないところにもクイア漫画の文化というのは存在しているということ。でそれが少なくともこの1970年代の半ばに一般の青年誌最高発行部数が20万部に至る一般の青年誌で連載されていたこと、そしてそれがエログロという文脈ではなくて、芸術的な文芸作品として読まれていたこと、そして批評家の評価も高かったこと、さらに、基本的にそのゲイ漫画もボーイズラブもユリ漫画も一つはある種パーソナルなファンタジーとしての世界を描いていることが多いんですけれども、この関東平野っていうのは社会の中にあるクイアっていうもののドラマをちゃんと描いているということで、これはものすごくで、しかもそれを描きつつトランスジェンダーの描き方というのが今の目で見ても全然差別的であったりとか偏見があったりという感じではないということ そういうの、これは上村さん先生という作家の力量でもあるんでしょうけども、そういうことはものすごく、この70年代の半ばにすでに日本にあったというのは、とてもいろんな欧米のカルチャーと比べると大きな違いなのではないかということと、私は最近ちょっと個人的にセクシャルマイノリティと社会のドラマというところにすごく興味を惹かれているので、私が弟の夫を書きたいと思ったのも文脈的にはこういった今までのようにセクシャルマイノリティの私自身の内面を掘るんではなくて、セクシャルマイノリティと社会との関わりの中に生まれるドラマというのを書きたいなと思ったという意味では、この私の弟の夫というのはこの関東平野に極めて、ライン的には近いものがありますという話です。
So, queer manga exists outside the categories that we designate as queer creators and queer subjects. This was something that came out in the mid-70s in a general audience magazine, general interest magazine, that had circulation of over 200,000 units. This story existed outside of the so-called theme of eroguro, which would be the loose umbrella we use to talk about perversion or anything that's sexual or it's erotic grotesque. So and then it was considered literary work. It had critical acclaim. Certainly there were elements of personal fantasy, and this artist is also known for doing more sort of extravagant sort of things, but this was actually just a quiet story about a queer person living inside normative society. So I'm interested in it because it sort of shows how in Japanese culture and historically, even in depictions from manga in the past, transgender folk were not depicted as being odd, and that wasn't the main subject. It wasn't the fact that she was odd, it was that she was coming to terms with a lifestyle, and this idea of how sexual minorities, which is a phraseology that's very common in Japan, interact with the status quo is really fascinating to me, especially because I'm writing something called My Brother's Husband, which is also about some queer thematics inside mainstream society.
Thank you, Tagame Sensei. Yes, this is the end of the conference, but why don't we stick around for a few more minutes? We have 30 minutes before the next thing starts, so I'd like to get to Jonathan's piece. This is all about Gengaro Tagame.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. It's really a great event. There's so much good energy. I think an event like this is one where we kind of approach material from a critical standpoint, but also from a highly personal one. I think the connection to manga especially, or the connection to comics, is something that frequently is a deeply, deeply personal question. So today I'd like to present really without images. And present my thoughts about the work of Tagame Gengaro. I myself am someone who works heavily in and around images, curating them. I also work in performance recently. But I thought I'd approach today's task really with the eyes or the thoughts of a critic. So as a way of self-introduction, let me mention that my very first interest in comics of any kind came from reading Japanese gay porn and culture magazines as a gay, cisgendered male teenager living in Tokyo in the 1980s, and encouraging as such a young gay man might, in his explorations of sexuality, a very brilliant keyhole, Tagame Gengaro. Tagame's manga are the kind of keyhole you might imagine in a Kubrick film or some horror flick, where slim shafts of light in several directions suggest a blindingly bright room, best accessed not directly, but rather through the narrowing yet still unadulterated distillation that a keyhole offers. You know you will eventually go into that room and be accustomed to the glare, but you're also delighting in the harsh other beauty that the shut door produces. In retrospect, I may call this an encounter with the sublime. Exquisite visual technique, perverse twists in exposition, masterful research in historical realism, hypermasculine story settings that flirt with fascist aesthetics, but where violence is only associated with pleasure, what we might call a curious but not uncommon kind of pacifist masochism, and his fascination with human limits, experiential, corporeal, and existential. These are the materials of Takame Gengoro's blinding brilliance. Simply depraved, others would call it, as the seemingly unwilling but always eventually masochistic subjects of Tagame's narratives, especially their orifices and their genitalia, but sometimes also their limbs, even their torsos, survive a wide gamut of torment, humiliation, and subordination, sometimes in powerfully charged contexts of Japanese victimization. A Japanese sex slave in China, POWs in an American camp in wartime South Pacific, and of course the humdrum of everyday Japanese power relations, Japanese sportsmen and their managers, office workers and company presidents, samurai and their lords, all who experience such political inequity, but are then allowed to transform that social failure into pleasure and enjoy it. Both the mighty and the ingenue are subject to Tagame's wickedness, but it seems that the powerful always warrant more pain. Drawing boldly from Japanese and non-Japanese aesthetics, Tagame's narratives at times embody a post-war victimization, while his hyper-masculine aesthetics suggest at times a nationalism of the body. One recalls in his work the aesthetics of other Japanese gay artists, the collagist and illustrator Hasegawa Sadao, or Yato Tamotsu, the confidant of Mishima Yukio, a well-known nationalist in Japan, who committed seppuku, or ritual suicide, after a kind of staged coup d'etat of the Japanese army or self-defense forces. Still, skirting such terrain, Tagame's work never collapses into right-wing, self-adoring fascism. Such stories certainly appealed to me, and surely to tens of thousands of gay men in Japan in the 1980s, 1990s, and of course they continue to do so today, where he has strong followings in, when he has strong followings in the US, in Europe, and in China, just to name a few locales. Here I would like to speak, though, a little bit about the original context and the appearance of his work. The disorganized jumble of Japanese gay men's porn magazine production in that period was less concerned with positive representations or sleek design, and I still cherish the Sears catalog, thick volumes of that era, for their awkward juxtaposition of such incredible work as Tagame's with more common beefcake material, culture essays, love stories, and so forth. Some years into purchasing these materials, I realized I had stopped buying the monthly magazines available at the late-night X-rated bookshops close to the bars to enjoy them in and of themselves. Instead, I was buying these 200 to 300 page thick tomes of stories, personnels, and advertising for that very small sliver of 10 pages or so that were 10 Tagame Gengoro's serialized manga. Lugging each fat volume home was always worth it, though I'd usually have finished reading the Tagame piece by the end of the subway ride home. My haste may have been tinged with shameful embarrassment, but the early Sunday morning trains were scarcely populated, and my greedy reading was certainly not regrettable, as I'd later read each installment several times over again, sometimes studiously looking up the Japanese kanji characters. And I do recommend porn with text as a good means to improve reading fluency for languages with difficult scripts. And of course, yes. And of course, directly enjoying the pleasures of Tagame's enjoying the pleasures that Tagame's manga and my own body would produce in union. In today's panel, we're asked to think about queer manga, especially its history and its cultural context. So I hope you'll allow me to underline something in what has been personal in this personal recollection that may be useful for us to think about. In other words, gay men in pre-internet Japan would encounter Tagame's work not as an occult or special taste, not in some special SM section, nor in the high arts wing of gay male culture, but as the normal stuff in their monthly commercial encyclopedias of sexual fantasy, such as Barozoku or Bari. And Tagame himself at one point became a central figure in this fledgling publishing industry. Part of this speaks to the bargain basement budget of gay pornography in Japan, and part of it to a more general social acceptance for SM-themed fantasies of sex. So, although Bruno Gmunder's cover in the recent English publications describe Tagame as producing quote-unquote visionary work in BDSM-oriented hardcore comics, it's also important to note that this was no niche market. In the low-budget world of Japanese gay porn magazines, some of which literally duplicated without permission American and European pornography to fill their pages, readers were always of many fantasies. Likewise, new talent would often arrive in the editor's mailbox, often from the very readers of these magazines. In this sense, I like to think of the context for Tagame's early work as tied to a place and a time when fantasy was imagined not as singular and specialized or even necessarily deep, but as diverse, metonymic, and not hermetically sealed. In other words, one fantasy was always adjacent to other kinds of sexual fantasies, the vast majority of which were advertisements, either personals for individual readers, or the commercially produced videos and photo books. Though not to the taste of all readers, Tagame's extreme stories were never presented as anything more extreme than the volume itself. Tagame took us to the limits, and that could be nothing special at all. In this way, this is a great, albeit haphazard, ethical achievement. So discovering Tagame, a man I'm delighted to have known personally for some years now, early in life, was a great fortune. And because fortune is best shared, I've made a point of introducing Tagame's work when I could to my students, translating it on occasion, and about 10 or 12 years ago, fervently but also unsuccessfully proposing publication of a Tagame volume to small US publishers who didn't, unfortunately, take the bait. So I'm really thrilled that Anne Ishii at Massive, along with Graham, have achieved this tremendous goal, and I want to applaud them for this incredible intercultural gift that they've given us. Also Bruno Gmunder in Berlin. But I think it's important also to point out how queer manga, like the kind that the brilliant Tagame Gengoro writes, emerge from a deeply compelling intersection of political, cultural, and aesthetic forces. And I'd like to propose two general theorems that can help us focus on the work that Tagame-san in particular has achieved. And so I'm about maybe another 3 or 4 minutes, close to the end. Theorem 1. Tagame's manga are a struggle of seeing. Manga, queer manga included, is a broad global phenomenon having much to do with Japan. Japan, of course, has been prominently sexualized in the Euro-American imagination, most likely from the sex trade and overseas brothel businesses set up in European colonies in China and Southeast Asia, where often lighter-skinned Japanese women were preferred by European male customers over the quote-unquote darker-skinned subjects of the colony itself. So Japan operated as a kind of sex export business in the late 19th century. So there is already an overdetermined reception for what might be called Japanese perversity in the West. But the ways in which queer manga live outside the mainstream, in often highly tentative relations to the well-oiled machines of capitalism and consumerism, have to do in almost equal parts with how official Japan has refused to see itself, and how official humankind, if we can so define the normal, has refused to portray itself. Like many at this assembly of queers and comics, I fervently believe the stakes of queerness are also the stakes of unruly, obdurate representation. Queer manga is a politics of being present, sometimes visually, sometimes conceptually, and of being represented. Queer not manga is a struggle about how we can see. Recently, Tagame has authored a screenplay, Berlin Wanderers, that has been made into a film for distribution this coming year by gay porn actor turned gay film director Imaizumi Koichi. Imaizumi commented to me how interesting it was to produce a film, a moving image, from Tagame-san's manga-esque imagination. The contrast between long, extended shots of sex, characteristic of porn film, and akin in a way to the full-page frame, and then sudden close-ups, gives the film a manga-like editing, one that is both avant-garde and also familiar to fans of Tagame's work. But Tagame's connection to film here is not coincidental, as he is an avid cinephile and an eloquent film critic. Tagame is someone who has spoken frequently about his interest in gay, often European cineasts, such as Rainer Werner Fassbinder or Pier Paolo Pasolini. And it is evident how the delicate nihilism mixed with fervent belief in something other that these two filmmakers possess, or possessed, offers something in kin with Tagame's own point of view. Pasolini's notorious film, Salo, 120 Days of Sodom, based in part on the novel by the Marquis de Sade, is often cited for the depravity of its content and the difficulty the spectator has in watching it. But Pasolini, like Tagame, is keenly attentive not only to the content of representation, but to its form. Indeed, like any good master, he knows that form is key. And much as Salo is about the repulsive, disgusting, and abject ways in which fantasy can be imposed violently upon others, it is also about the very structures and forms that sustain fantasy. Salo requires essentially a female pianist and a raconteur who performed for the fascist leaders of the Italian Republic of Salo as it collapses in the waning days of World War II. The centrality of these figures in their very telling and presenting of the story catches you even as the film repulses. And here we can see Tagame's skill as he places the sweet manga-like images, or manga images of comparatively big-eyed, round-faced youths, and their innocent glances adjacent to the menacing figures who often a forbidden or unthinkable pleasure. Rarely, or perhaps never, could I venture to say, do we have in Tagame's work the victim's point of view. This is a certain kind of objectification of self, but a willing turning of self into object, into material. For Freud, the death drive is associated with an organism seeking to remove itself from stimulus. In Tagame's world, we could find instead the movement to a constant stimulus. The identification at the level of character is with the innocent victim who unwantingly suffers, but the narratorial voice is often limited to his perspective or knowledge. But at the same time as the point of view is lowered physically on the page, often to crotch level or below, somehow to the self-subordinating plane of the masochist, the perspective is omnipotently a sadistic. Here I would like to recall the closing of Pasolini's Salo. Shortly after, a charmingly sweet image of two young fascist soldiers in their military fatigues suddenly asking each other to dance as if it were the most common thing to do. Do we have the perspective of one of the sadists, the masters of this falling republic, in the adjacent room as he looks out through a pair of binoculars at the most horrendous scenes of tongue-cutting, branding, and crucifixion? Although the heinous republic is already in its death throes, we know that the visual empire the film suggests will somehow survive, as it is the disembodied close-up through those binoculars that ends the film. The seeing that is the last word of complicity. I think very much this is the economy that Tagame offers to his readers, perhaps with a great deal more pleasure than Pasolini offered it in Salo. Indeed, much as narrative is able to sustain identification, this passage towards timelessness recalls many of Tagame's stories, where time proceeds only to stand still, in a seemingly forever beyond free choice or even action. Simply the storyless, plotless, terrifying emptiness of sensation itself, something we might call pleasure. Or pain. Endless Game, Standing Ovation, The Flying Dutchman, The Cretan Cow. So many of Tagame's stories suggest not only in their cultural and historical breadth of the sources, but also in their very stories' elements, a temporality that exceeds the story's formal limits. So this is the kind of timelessness that I think Tagame is really interested in. And so now I move into my concluding point. This is theorem 2. So Tagame's desire survives the absence of the organism. Although pain, suffering, and destruction, even dismemberment, can form the material representation of Tagame's world, the image is not to be understood as its terminus, as its end. In other ways, I strongly believe the ways in which the drive, the life-affirming deviance of the sexual seeks representation, we could say, by instinctually attaching it to elements of culture that will allow it into expression. This is where Tagame's work and queer manga in general makes its most powerful intervention. Thus, in my opinion, and I would suspect the opinion of many in this room, the queer is an organic force emanating from the cusp of the psychical and the biological. It is lived, but it is also thought, as well as a response to cultural and social curtailments, both individual and social, political and mundane. In Tagame's work, we can see how queer manga refuses through a kind of citational absence. While my first theorem stressed the formal representation's reliance on an intangible but still evident form, queer manga and Tagame's work in particular also has strong ties to the question of representational suppression. And I have a section here, which in the interest of time I'll skip over, but it's about how censorship works in Japan as a very evident force, as opposed to American censorship in the post-war, which was at the level of discourse. So things could not be talked about during the US post-war occupation, whereas Japanese censorship relied on physically stamping out the text, the offending text. And we see that similar style of leaving the trace of the offense in the work, in Tagame's work, not only, but especially. And here, we must say that Tagame's work is unlike Japanese softcore films, much closer to its pink films. There is no desire to metaphorize sex. Instead, I come to my conclusion, Tagame's pornography is not metaphoric, tracing the hand of the censor, so to speak. In this regard, it holds quite a bit in common with Japanese pink films, such as the work of Wakamatsu Koji or Adachi Masao. Indeed, such work too relies heavily on violence as an expression of the sexual. But where Adachi or Wakamatsu films, where in those films violence seems to serve as a visual substitute for penetration, in Tagame's work, the violence itself is sublimated into a kind of unending abstraction. In concluding then, I'd like to suggest that the global appeal of Tagame's work is tied to a historically very specific image in Japan and to a particular development of gay consciousness in post-war Japan. But it is the very queerness of its nature, as it really needs nothing Japanese to make its most important points. Tagame's manga, queer manga, has a life that can be very far from Japan, something that is easily deracinated from those islands and how they might define themselves culturally or politically, officially or unofficially. But nor is Tagame's an abstract humanism. In poking and pinning the body with his pen, Tagame poses a question of masochistic but also sadistic immediacy.
Thank you, Jonathan. Maybe two questions from the audience, if anyone has any burning questions. Or
we'll be out there doing book things if you want books.
If you want to explore the layered world of Tagame Sensei's work, please talk to Anne.
Get biz books and check out Erica's blog. All right.
Follow @Queer Japan on social media. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.